You need to hear this. The 9 paths of every chosen one. The concept of being chosen isn't what most people think it is. It's not about divine selection or cosmic favoritism. It's not about being handed a golden ticket to an easier life. The truth is far more brutal and beautiful. Being chosen means being selected for a specific type of suffering that will forge you into something extraordinary. It means walking paths that most people will never understand, enduring trials that will either break you completely or transform you into an unstoppable force of nature. Dr. Joe Dispenza's research into neuroplasticity reveals something profound about human potential. Our brains are literally rewiring themselves based on our thoughts, emotions, and experiences every single day. When someone walks the path of the chosen, they're not just changing their circumstances, they're fundamentally altering their neural architecture. They're becoming a different species of human being, one thought, one choice, one moment of resistance at a time. David Goggins understands this at a cellular level. His transformation from an overweight, depressed young man into one of the world's most mentally resilient individuals wasn't magic. It was the systematic rewiring of his brain through voluntary suffering. He didn't wait for motivation or inspiration. He chose the hard path repeatedly until the hard path became his natural habitat. But here's what neither the spiritual communities nor the self-help gurus will tell you. The 9 paths of the chosen aren't beautiful journeys of self-discovery. They're brutal initiations that will strip away everything you think you know about yourself, everything you've been conditioned to believe about how life should work, everything that keeps you comfortable and small. These paths aren't destinations, they're ongoing processes of becoming that never truly end. The first path is the path of radical isolation. This isn't about being antisocial or misanthropic. This is about reaching a point where you realize that your growth requires you to step away from the collective consciousness that keeps most people trapped in mediocrity. You begin to understand that the opinions, expectations, and energy of others aren't just distractions. They're actively harmful to your evolution. Most people fear isolation because they've never learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful awareness of disconnection from others. Solitude is the powerful practice of connecting deeply with yourself. When you walk the path of radical isolation, you're not running away from people, you're running toward the person you're meant to become. You're creating space for your authentic voice to emerge from underneath layers of social conditioning and people-pleasing. This path requires you to get comfortable with being misunderstood. Your family will think you're going through a phase. Your friends will accuse you of becoming distant or arrogant. Society will try to shame you back into conformity with labels like antisocial or selfish. But here's what they don't understand. You're not isolating to hurt them. You're isolating to heal yourself. You're creating the conditions necessary for your own metamorphosis. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When we're constantly exposed to other people's thoughts, emotions, and energy, our mirror neurons fire continuously, making it nearly impossible to distinguish between our authentic desires and the reflected desires of those around us. Radical isolation allows these neural patterns to settle, creating space for your own authentic impulses to emerge. It's like clearing static from a radio signal. Suddenly you can hear your own frequency clearly. The second path is the path of relentless truth-telling. This goes far beyond honesty in your relationships with others. This is about developing the courage to see and speak truth, even when it destroys everything you've built your identity around. It's about looking at your own life with such brutal honesty that you can no longer maintain comfortable illusions about who you are or what you're capable of. Most people live in elaborate self-deception. They tell themselves stories about why they can't change, why their circumstances are unique, why their limitations are permanent. They construct entire worldviews designed to protect their ego from the discomfort of recognizing their own untapped potential. The chosen one cannot afford this luxury. They must develop the capacity to see reality as it is not as they wish it were. This path begins with admitting uncomfortable truths about yourself. Maybe you're not as intelligent as you pretend to be. Maybe your victim stories are keeping you weak. Maybe your spiritual practices are just another form of escapism. Maybe your relationships are built on mutual enablement rather than genuine love. Maybe your career is a slow form of suicide that you've convinced yourself is practical. The process of relentless truth-telling rewires your brain in profound ways. When you consistently choose accuracy over comfort, your prefrontal cortex strengthens while your emotional reactivity decreases. You develop what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to update your beliefs based on new information rather than defending outdated positions. This neurological shift is what allows chosen ones to adapt and evolve rapidly, while others remain stuck in the same patterns for decades. But this path comes with a price. Truth-telling often means the end of relationships, careers, and identities that were built on shared illusions. When you stop participating in collective self-deception, you become a mirror that reflects back uncomfortable realities. People will often choose to remove the mirror rather than face what it shows them. This is why the path of relentless truth-telling often leads to periods of profound loneliness and misunderstanding. The third path is the path of voluntary suffering. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the chosen one's journey. It's not about seeking pain for its own sake or developing a martyr complex. It's about recognizing that all meaningful growth occurs at the edge of your comfort zone and deliberately placing yourself in situations that will force you to expand beyond your current limitations. David Goggins exemplifies this path. His daily routine isn't designed for comfort, it's designed for transformation. He runs ultra-marathons not because he enjoys them, but because the process of pushing through extreme discomfort teaches him something about his own capacity that he couldn't learn any other way. He seeks out the hardest possible challenges not because he's masochistic, but because he understands that voluntary suffering is the price of involuntary strength. The neuroscience behind this approach is remarkable. When we voluntarily expose ourselves to controlled stress, our brains adapt by increasing production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, which promotes the growth of new neural connections. We also develop greater stress resilience, improved emotional regulation, and enhanced cognitive function. In essence, voluntary suffering literally makes you smarter, stronger, and more adaptable. But this path requires incredible discernment. The suffering must be purposeful, not random. It must stretch you without breaking you. It must be chosen consciously rather than imposed unconsciously. The goal isn't to become addicted to pain, it's to become comfortable with discomfort. It's to develop such confidence in your ability to handle difficult situations that external circumstances lose their power to disturb your inner peace. This path often begins with small acts of self-discipline that feel insignificant but compound over time. Taking cold showers when you want warm ones. Exercising when you feel tired. Speaking truthfully when lying would be easier. Saving money when spending would feel better. Each small act of voluntary discomfort strengthens your capacity to choose your response to life rather than simply reacting to circumstances. The fourth path is the path of intuitive rebellion. This involves developing such a strong connection to your inner guidance system that you're willing to act on intuitive insights, even when they contradict logical analysis, social expectations, or conventional wisdom. It's about learning to trust the intelligence of your body, your emotions, and your deeper knowing over the limitations of your rational mind. Most people have been trained to distrust their intuition from childhood. They've been taught that feelings aren't facts, that emotions are unreliable, that only logical thinking can be trusted. But neuroscience reveals that our intuitive faculties are actually processing vast amounts of information below the threshold of conscious awareness. What we call gut feelings are often our subconscious mind's attempt to communicate important insights that our rational mind hasn't yet recognized. Dr. Dispenza's research shows that when we learn to access altered states of consciousness through meditation and other practices, we can tap into information fields that exist beyond our five senses. This isn't mystical thinking, it's cutting-edge neuroscience. When we quiet the analytical mind and open to intuitive knowing, we gain access to a form of intelligence that can guide us toward outcomes we couldn't have planned or predicted rationally. The path of intuitive rebellion requires developing what we might call intelligent disobedience. This means learning to distinguish between the voice of wisdom and the voice of fear, between authentic guidance and wishful thinking, between divine inspiration and ego projection. It means becoming so attuned to your inner compass that you can navigate by it, even when the terrain is completely unfamiliar. This path often manifests as a series of seemingly irrational decisions that somehow lead to extraordinary outcomes. Quitting a secure job without a backup plan, moving to a new city based on a feeling, ending relationships that look good on paper but feel wrong, energetically pursuing creative projects that have no guaranteed return on investment. From the outside, these choices often appear reckless or self-destructive. But the chosen one has learned to distinguish between recklessness and courage, between self-destruction and self-liberation. The fifth path is the path of emotional mastery. This isn't about suppressing emotions or maintaining constant positivity. It's about developing such a sophisticated understanding of your emotional landscape that you can navigate any feeling without being overwhelmed, controlled, or defined by it. It's about becoming the master of your inner world rather than its victim. Most people are at the mercy of their emotional states. They wake up in a bad mood and let it ruin their entire day. They get triggered by criticism and spend hours in reactive loops. They feel anxious about the future and become paralyzed in the present. They experience heartbreak and convince themselves they'll never love again. The chosen one cannot afford this emotional volatility too much. Depends on their ability to maintain clarity and focus regardless of circumstances. Emotional mastery begins with developing what psychologists call meta-emotion, the ability to observe your emotions rather than being consumed by them. When anger arises, instead of immediately acting on it or suppressing it, you learn to study it. What triggered this feeling? What is it trying to tell you? What would be the most skillful response? This creates space between stimulus and response, between feeling and action, between emotion and identity. The neuroscience of emotional regulation shows us that this practice literally rewires the brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and rational decision-making, develops stronger connections to the limbic system, responsible for emotional processing. This means that over time, your rational mind becomes better at modulating emotional responses without suppressing them entirely. But emotional mastery goes deeper than regulation. It involves learning to use emotions as information rather than treating them as problems to be solved. Anger might be signaling a boundary violation. Sadness might be indicating a need for connection or meaning. Fear might be highlighting areas where you need to develop greater skill or confidence. Anxiety might be your system's way of preparing you for important challenges ahead. The chosen one learns to work with their emotions as allies rather than fighting them as enemies. They develop the capacity to feel deeply without being destabilized, to remain compassionate without becoming codependent, to maintain boundaries without becoming cold or disconnected. This emotional sophistication becomes one of their greatest assets, allowing them to navigate complex relationships and challenging situations with grace and effectiveness. The sixth path is the path of systematic deprogramming. This involves the methodical identification and elimination of limiting beliefs, toxic thought patterns, and unconscious programming that keeps you operating below your true capacity. It's about recognizing that most of what you think you know about yourself and reality was downloaded into your consciousness before you had the ability to critically evaluate it. Dr. Dispenza's work reveals that by age 7, Most children have absorbed the emotional patterns, belief systems, and behavioral templates of their environment. These programs continue running automatically throughout their lives, creating the illusion that their conditioned responses are their authentic personality. The chosen one must learn to distinguish between their programmed responses and their genuine nature. This path requires developing what we might call belief archaeology, the ability to excavate the deepest layers of your conditioning and examine them consciously. You begin to question assumptions you've never questioned before. Why do you believe that success requires sacrifice? Where did you learn that you're not worthy of love unless you perform perfectly? Who taught you that life is supposed to be a struggle? When did you decide that your dreams were unrealistic? The process of systematic deprogramming often reveals that many of our most fundamental beliefs about ourselves and reality are not only false, but actively harmful. We discover that we've been living according to other people's definitions of success, happiness, and meaning. We realize that we've been trying to solve problems that don't actually exist while ignoring opportunities that are right in front of us. This path can be disorienting and uncomfortable because it involves dismantling the very foundation of your identity. As you release old programming, you may go through periods of confusion about who you really are and what you actually want. This is normal and necessary. You're not losing yourself, you're finding yourself underneath layers of conditioning that were never really you to begin with. The neuroplasticity research shows that this process of conscious reprogramming is not only possible, but remarkably effective. When we consistently practice new thought patterns and emotional responses, our brains create new neural pathways, while allowing old unused pathways to weaken and eventually disappear. We can literally change our personality, our capabilities, and our relationship to reality through conscious, sustained effort. The seventh path is the path of ruthless prioritization. This involves developing the ability to identify what truly matters most in your life, and then organizing everything else around those priorities. It's about learning to say no to good opportunities so you can say yes to great ones. It's about recognizing that time and energy are your most precious resources and treating them accordingly. Most people live reactive lives, responding to whatever demands the loudest attention rather than focusing on what's most important. They check email, constantly attend meetings that accomplish nothing, maintain relationships that drain their energy, and pursue goals that don't align with their values. They mistake being busy for being productive, confuse activity with progress, and wonder why they feel exhausted despite not accomplishing anything meaningful. The chosen one cannot afford this scattered approach to life. They must develop laser-like focus on their highest priorities while learning to ignore or eliminate everything else. This requires developing what Warren Buffett calls the 20-slot rule. Imagining that you only have 20 investment opportunities for your entire life, which forces you to be incredibly selective about where you place your attention and energy. Ruthless prioritization begins with clarity about your core values and non-negotiable objectives. What are you really trying to accomplish with your life? What kind of person do you want to become? What legacy do you want to leave? What would you regret not pursuing if you knew you had limited time? These questions help you identify your true priorities, rather than the priorities that have been imposed on you by others. Once you have clarity about what matters most, everything else becomes a simple decision. Does this activity, relationship, or opportunity support my highest priorities, or does it distract from them? This creates a powerful filter for making decisions quickly and confidently. You stop agonizing over choices because you have clear criteria for evaluation. The neuroscience of focus reveals that our brains are not designed for multitasking. When we try to pay attention to multiple things simultaneously, our performance on all tasks decreases significantly. But when we focus intensively on one important task at a time, our brains enter a state of flow that dramatically enhances our effectiveness and satisfaction. Ruthless prioritization is essentially training your brain to operate in its optimal state more frequently. This path often requires making difficult choices that others don't understand. You might decline social invitations to work on important projects. You might end relationships that feel comfortable but aren't helping you grow. You might turn down lucrative opportunities that don't align with your deeper purpose. From the outside, these choices might appear selfish or antisocial. But the chosen one understands that they can't serve others effectively until they've developed their own capacity to its fullest potential. The eighth path is the path of accelerated learning. This involves developing such an efficient and effective approach to acquiring new skills and knowledge that you can adapt to changing circumstances faster than most people can even recognize what's happening. It's about becoming a learning machine that can master new domains quickly and thoroughly. Traditional education teaches us that learning is slow, difficult, and requires years of formal instruction. But neuroscience reveals that our brains are capable of much more rapid adaptation when we use the right methods. The key is understanding how to create the optimal conditions for neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections and reorganize existing ones. Dr. Dispenza's research shows that the brain learns most effectively when we combine focused attention, elevated emotion, and clear intention. This means that passionate engagement with new material creates much stronger neural pathways than passive absorption of information. When you're genuinely excited about what you're learning, your brain produces neurotransmitters that enhance memory formation and skill development. The path of accelerated learning involves developing meta-learning skills, learning how to learn more effectively. This includes understanding your optimal learning style, identifying the most efficient sequence for acquiring new skills, recognizing the patterns that govern different domains of knowledge, and developing strategies for rapid skill transfer from one area to another. One crucial aspect of this path is learning to embrace confusion and uncertainty as necessary parts of the learning process rather than problems to be avoided. Most people become uncomfortable when they don't understand something immediately and either give up or seek premature clarity. The chosen one learns to sit with not knowing while continuing to engage with challenging material, trusting that understanding will emerge through sustained attention and practice. Another key element is developing what psychologists call deliberate practice, the ability to focus intensively on the specific aspects of a skill that need improvement rather than simply repeating what you already know how to do well. This requires constant self-assessment, immediate feedback, and willingness to work at the edge of your current capacity. The accelerated learner also understands the importance of teaching others as a way of deepening their own understanding. When you can explain something clearly to someone else, you know that you've truly mastered it. This creates a virtuous cycle where learning and teaching reinforce each other, accelerating the development of expertise in any domain. The ninth and final path is the path of integrated service. This is where all the previous paths converge into a unified expression of your highest potential. Having developed radical self-awareness, emotional mastery, and accelerated learning capacity, you're now capable of serving others in ways that create genuine transformation rather than temporary relief. Most people want to help others, but they try to serve from a place of their own unhealed wounds and unresolved limitations. They give advice they haven't successfully applied to their own lives. They try to rescue others from problems they haven't solved themselves. They attempt to teach skills they haven't mastered. This type of service, however well-intentioned, often creates more problems than it solves. The chosen one understands that the most powerful service comes from overflow rather than emptiness. You can only give what you have. You can only teach what you've learned. You can only heal others to the extent that you've healed yourself. This is why the path of integrated service comes last. It requires all the previous paths to be well established before it can be expressed authentically. Integrated service isn't about sacrificing yourself for others or trying to save the world. It's about discovering your unique gifts and expressing them in ways that naturally benefit others. It's about finding the intersection between what you're passionate about, what you're exceptionally good at, and what the world needs. When these three elements align, work becomes play service, becomes joy, and impact becomes inevitable. This path requires developing what we might call conscious leadership. The ability to influence others through your example, rather than your words, to inspire growth, rather than dependence, to empower others to discover their own answers, rather than providing solutions they haven't earned. It's about becoming the kind of person whose very presence elevates the consciousness and capability of everyone around them. The neuroscience of influence reveals that people are much more affected by our emotional state and energy than by our logic or arguments. When we've done the deep work of our own transformation, we naturally radiate a quality of presence that others find compelling and inspiring. We don't have to try to influence people. Our integrated development speaks for itself. But perhaps most importantly, integrated service involves understanding that your individual transformation is not separate from the collective transformation of humanity. As you heal your own wounds, you're healing ancestral patterns that have been passed down through generations. As you expand your own consciousness, you're contributing to the expansion of human potential itself. As you develop your own capacity for love, wisdom, and power, you're making it easier for others to access these same qualities. This is the ultimate paradox of the Chosen One's journey. It begins with radical self-focus, but ends with selfless service. You start by turning inward to heal your own limitations and discover your own potential. But you end by turning outward to serve the healing and development of others. The path that seemed selfish becomes the foundation for the most generous possible contribution to the world. The 9 paths are not sequential stages that you complete once and move beyond. They are ongoing practices that deepen and integrate throughout your lifetime. You don't graduate from the path of radical isolation. You learn to move fluidly between solitude and connection as circumstances require. You don't master emotional regulation and never feel triggered again. You develop the capacity to return to center more quickly when you're thrown off balance. Each path develops different aspects of your potential while contributing to the overall integration of your being. The isolation develops your independence and authenticity. The truth-telling develops your courage and discernment. The voluntary suffering develops your resilience and strength. The intuitive rebellion develops your wisdom and creativity. The emotional mastery develops your stability and compassion. The systematic deprogramming develops your freedom and flexibility. The ruthless prioritization develops your focus and effectiveness. The accelerated learning develops your adaptability and competence. The integrated service develops your purpose and fulfillment. Walking these paths requires a level of commitment that most people are not willing to make. It requires choosing growth over comfort, truth over popularity, authenticity over approval, purpose over pleasure. It requires being willing to be misunderstood, criticized, and sometimes even rejected by people who are committed to staying exactly where they are. But for those who choose this journey, the rewards are beyond anything that conventional success can offer. You develop such confidence in your own capacity that external circumstances lose their power to disturb your peace. You become so clear about your purpose that decision-making becomes simple and natural. You cultivate such deep self-acceptance that you no longer need others' approval to feel worthy. You develop such trust in life's intelligence that you can navigate uncertainty with curiosity rather than fear. Most importantly, you become a living example of what's possible for any human being who's willing to do the work of conscious transformation. You become proof that people can change, that limitations can be transcended, that extraordinary lives are available to anyone willing to walk the paths that most people avoid. This is what it truly means to be chosen, not to receive special privileges, but to accept special responsibilities. Not to have an easier life, but to have a more meaningful one. Not to be rescued from the human condition, but to transcend it through conscious evolution. The choice, as always, is yours.